This is your profanity warning. Your warning that bad words are about to be said in the following podcast. If there are children in the room, in the house, or indeed within a 5-mile radius, please send them away. This podcast is not for us. Is that good?
Yeah, it was great. That was perfect.
Okay.
In magic, there is neither good nor evil. It is merely a science. The science of causing change to occur by means of one's will. The sinister reputation attaching to it is entirely groundless and is based on superstition rather than objective observation. The power of the will is something people do not understand, attributing to it mysterious qualities which it does not possess, being merely the power of mind over matter, or in the greater number of cases, the power of mind over mind, as your mind now is succumbing to mine. For as you look into my eyes and listen to my voice, your will is leaving you, slipping away, and you are now beneath my influence.
Coming to you live from the recent past in New York City, where we sacrifice goats in the middle of Fifth Avenue and no one blinks an eye. Welcome to 21 Jump Scare. I'm Eric Winnick.
And I'm Bradford Lorick. 21 Jump Scare is a podcast about horror films, told from several points of view.
We call this podcast 21 Jump Scare because, at least for now, our plan is to only produce 21 episodes.
But also because, as in a certain TV series from the 80s, one of us is going back to school, as it were, to learn something new. And this loser will be experiencing a horror film he hasn't seen yet.
As assigned by a true horror snob, aficionado, which is to say, you. So each week we bring you a film from the perspective of someone rewatching it and from the point of view of someone experiencing it for the first time, which is to say, me. So now let us turn to this week's film, 1968's Hammer classic, The Devil Rides Out.
And we should be clear that we're talking about the X-rated version of the film, at least as assigned by the British Board of Film Censors. So we're afraid to say that no one under 16 may listen to this podcast. In other words, fuck off. Okay, Mr. Winnick, as our first timer, why don't you start us off with a brief synopsis of The Devil Rides Out?
Arriving home to England in his private plane, Rex van Ryn meets up with his friend, the stately and aristocratic Duc de Richleau, and the two travel together to the home of Simon, a young man with whom they have planned a fond reunion. Simon, the son of a friend of the Duc and Rex's, is home, but has seemingly forgotten about the reunion, instead having planned a meeting of what he calls an astronomical society. Simon quickly introduces the Duc and Rex to the head of the society, a Mr. Mocata, and a young woman who seems familiar to Rex, the lovely Miss Tanith Carlisle. Something doesn't seem right to the Duc. There's satanic panic in the air, and a quick scan of Simon's upper floors proves his hunch correct. 2 chickens have been stowed away in a basket, waiting to be sacrificed. Dispatching Rex and Tanith to the country home of the Duke's niece Marie and her husband Richard, Rex, Tanith, the Duc, and Simon find themselves falling in and out of the clutches of Mocata, and soon the devil himself.
So who's in the film?
So you have your main characters and your sort of subsidiary characters. We're gonna focus on the main ones for now. The film stars the late great Christopher Lee as Duc de Richleau. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
I think he's the Duc de Waterloo.
Duc de Richleau. And it is always good to see Christopher Lee in something other than the villain role, especially as someone who grew up knowing him primarily as Scaramanga, Saruman, and Count Dooku.
We also have Leon Greene as the Duke's friend Rex van Ryn.
Then there is the lovely, fetching Nike Arrighi. Sorry. Arrighi, who later married into an Italian royal family.
Yes, she's a Borghese. She's a Borghese princess.
She is, and is still with us today. She plays Tanith Carlisle. Charles Gray is Mocata, a character whose name I mistook throughout the film as McCarter, as in the McCarter Center, which is why it's always good to have your captions on.
I wondered if someone tonight was going to bring that up, because it's very easy to mistake for McCarter. We should point out that Charles Gray, who sadly left us in 1971 at the age of 2000. I'm sorry, I might have misread that.
That's good. Just keep it. We'll edit it out.
Keep going.
We'll fix that later.
He sadly left us in 2000 at the age of 71. But he's Charles Gray, man. Either one of those things could be accurate.
It's true. It's true.
Charles Gray is probably best known to generations of film nerds as the narrator with no neck in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and as Blofeld in Diamonds Are Forever.
I just want to point out how remarkable it is that we have two Bond villains playing opposite each other in this film, and I love that.
I didn't see Hervé Villechaize in this movie.
No, but you saw his boss.
Nowhere to be found.
You saw his boss.
True. The screenplay for The Devil Rides Out is by famed horror and sci-fi writer Richard Matheson. It's based on the 1934 book by Dennis Wheatley, and the director was none other than Terence Fisher, who'd had a long and distinguished career with Hammer Film up to that point. He's probably best known for Hammer's remake of Frankenstein, The Curse of Frankenstein from 1957, featuring Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. Fisher also directed Hammer's horror of Dracula in 1958, which is one of their best films, The Curse of the Werewolf in 1961, and The Phantom of the Opera with Herbert Lom in 1962.
He just was all about the remakes, wasn't he? Because he also remade the Jekyll and Hyde story as The Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll in 1960. He made a film called The Gorgon, The Earth Dies Screaming, Island of the Burning Damned, also with Lee and Cushing. And then Frankenstein and Dracula really became his bread and butter. So he went on to such gems as Dracula, Prince of Darkness, Frankenstein Created Woman, Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, and his last film, Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell in 1974. So what's your experience with Hammer films beyond the one we're going to talk about today, sir?
I have a strange relationship to Hammer horror. I've seen a lot of them. I've seen the good ones and the bad ones and the funny ones. And there are some that I really love, like 1964's The Anniversary, which stars Bette Davis as the one-eyed widow, Mrs. Taggart, who wears a cat eye shaped eye patch that changes color to match her outfits. And that, I think, is sort of like a kind of bar for Hammer horror. I generally tend to think that a lot of Hammer films are poor replicas, or as close to replicas as they could be, for the Universal films that were coming out of Hollywood in the 1930s and 40s. But that's not to say that Hammer horror does not have its great qualities, its fantastic attributes. They're eminently watchable films, and the color of blood in Hammer horror movies is unlike blood in anything else.
Well, it's Kensington gore, isn't it?
Kensington gore, yes. I mean, it is very often opaque and bright red and has viscosity unlike most other fluids known to man. Hammer horror is awash with Kensington gore. And, this movie is a pretty rare exception. It's relatively bloodless, unless you consider what comes out of the goats.
Tell me, what, to the extent that you are aware of this, what was the rationale behind remaking so many classic Universal films, including the James Whale films?
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily the James Whale films, it's the subject matter, right? And, I mean, I think they wanted to take a crack at some of these classic characters that had obviously made a lot of money for Universal and later other studios in the United States. And they got on board with these classic horror stock characters.
So, what did critics think of it?
Well, the only contemporaneous review we could find was from Howard Thompson in the New York Times, who said, and I quote, even with a rare, fine burst of black magic from Hollywood, such as Rosemary's Baby, the occult is more Britain's cup of tea, as is evident from persistent trickle of modest melodramas, some of which have hit the jackpot. The best is still Burn Witch Burn, that brilliant campus whodunit 5 years ago. The runner-up remains the more recent The Devil's Own, with Joan Fontaine scared out of her wits in a genteel village. Yesterday's entry, The Devil's Bride, which was the American title for The Devil Rides Out,
right,
with a horde of Satan worshippers clattering across the English countryside, places about third. For all its wild-eyed finale, lumpy absurdities, and excessive length, this little picture ends up on its feet, wavering but standing. For one thing, it sustains flavor and atmosphere and beautiful color photography, with the evil doings framed by cool, rural greenery and stately homes.
That I will agree with. It definitely has some stately homes. Are you familiar with those other two films, by the way?
Burn Witch Burn and The Devil's Own?
Yeah.
Yes, I've seen both of them.
And do you agree with Howard's ranking?
I don't think I do. I think The Devil Rides Out is a better cinematic experience.
Okay, so tell me, sir, how did you first hear about this film and where did you first see it?
I first saw it maybe like 2 years ago.
Recently?
It's not easy to necessarily view.
No.
Unless you enjoy buying Blu-rays and DVDs, which I certainly used to, or you enjoy a lot of pop-ups on illegal streaming websites
which we definitely didn't use.
Don't do that.
And so why, of all the films that you could have chosen, and let's face it, there are a lot of films you could have chosen, why this one?
Well, because, it has a great reputation as probably the best horror film that Hammer's ever turned out. It's elegant. It features, I think, excellent performances across the board from nearly all of the cast. And, if you're going to see a Hammer horror film, I think you should probably see something original and something that's well executed, as opposed to, I don't know, Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde.
So let's just clarify here that Hammer was a studio. How long was it around, and was it mainly known for horror, or you alluded to a Bette Davis film? Did it do other genres?
Well, the Bette Davis films like The Anniversary or The Nanny were kind of part of the tradition of Grand Dame Guignol films. Mm-hmm. Movies like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane or Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte. So again, it was kind of an instance of Hammer jumping on the bandwagon of what was performing well in the United States. And in fact, with those movies, Hammer was using the same cast, To answer your question, is it still around? I think The Woman in Black with Daniel Radcliffe may have been a Hammer film. There was a great film that came out a couple of years ago with Timothy Spall called Wakewood. And that might have been Hammer's return because Hammer, at a certain point, Hammer kind of went away, but has come back in recent years. I don't know what the status of the studio is.
And it sounds like Terence Fisher really was kind of like their house guy.
I think he has a reputation as being kind of a journeyman director, or had a reputation at the time for being kind of, serviceable enough to like jump from project to project to project. And Hammer was really churning out a lot in their heyday,
Yeah.
But I think he's been reappraised in recent years. A lot of people really love what he did with this film in particular.
Right, but he's also affiliated with some of the films that Hammer is best known for.
When you go from film to film to film, you will see a lot of recognizable faces.
Yes. And I guess Cushing as well. But
oh yeah, Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, they were like the Laurel and Hardy of English horror. You know what I mean?
You know what, actually, which is interesting, they both went on to play Star Wars villains as well. Look at that.
I didn't know that.
Now's about the time that we need to issue a full spoiler alert.
Yes, we will be spoiling this film completely. And if you have not yet seen this film and plan to see this film, please watch the film and then come back and listen to the rest of the episode. Or don't. We don't care. Stay away. Regarding the devil and his riding out, this is your first time at the rodeo. What did you think?
Oh, this is a crazy fucking film. It is definitely dated. The effects are largely
amazing,
cheap and unconvincing. The rear
amazing.
The rear screen projection is embarrassing, but then again, all films used it back then, so it's kind of its time.
Doesn't it give you a kind of a warm feeling to see somebody
a nice, warm
riding
feeling.
in an open car with no wind rushing through their hair?
Correct.
You know, in the English countryside where you can see their silhouettes against the screen. Yeah.
You know, but I will say this for it. The cast commits 150,000%.
Oh my God.
Really sells the silliness of this film.
Up and down the cast list. They are all in it to win it.
It's weird. And if you kind of take it at face value, it's good, clean fun.
For an X-rated film.
You know, I mean, I enjoyed it. I have some questions, of course.
I have some questions for you too, sir.
Okay.
When you say it's dated, right? I mean, it takes place in the 30s.
Yep.
It's shot in the 60s.
Yep.
Where does its feeling dated come in for you?
Oh, the effects. Okay. Really. I mean, there's also, we'll get into this in the gratuitous award section of the show.
There's nothing gratuitous about this movie.
It's a little bit old-fashioned, shall we say, in some of its attitudes towards women and people of African descent. I mean, you know, it is what it is. I mean, you get what you paid for on this one.
But you know, I think what is probably most exciting about this film is the subject matter. Satanism and satanic panic were pretty hot button issues at the time, and I think that was a major contributor to its X rating. But I love the level of detail that they put into exploring the satanic storyline, and you know, the sort of authenticity with which the actors kind of imbue their performances.
Well, Wheatley, from what I've read, Wheatley was kind of an expert on Satanism. In fact, he was probably the model for the Duke in a way, because he was straight up anti-Satanist, and he worked to expose people who were, you know, espousing that philosophy. I had never heard of him, but I've heard of Ben Wheatley. And we should also clarify, this X rating is in England only. This film would not have earned an X rating in the United States, not even in 1968.
As far as Wheatley is concerned, he had written an entire series of books.
Yes.
In which the Duc de Richleau was the central character.
That's where I wanted to begin, sir, with you. That's a great segue.
All right.
Because I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Duke, because I love that character. I want to ask, who is the Duke and what is his backstory? What is he a Duke of? I noticed it's spelled D-U-C. I found myself wanting to know more about him. I wanted to know more about his relationship with Rex and Simon's father. I had a feeling that since Wheatley wrote a series of novels about the Duke. There's probably a lot of backstory there, but for the sake of this film, he's pretty much I don't want to say a cipher. He's almost like a superhero. Like he's got, you know, powers of deduction and powers of reasoning, and he knows exactly what to say. He's kind of like the ultimate guy that you want in a situation like this. He knows exactly what to do, what to say, and how to deal with every situation. I'm just wondering if you feel like there was something like we could have invested more in the character had we known more about him. You know, if we were to go back and seek out this series by Wheatley, and he wrote many series, apparently one that was even influential to Ian Fleming, but I'm sure there is more of the backstory in the novels, and I think we probably do learn more about Rex and Simon's father, because the three of them seem like they were a little bit of a musketeers
trio.
Yes, exactly. And they clearly feel some affinity for Simon. And at one point, I think Tanith says, you know, you're here to look after Simon and make sure that he's protected, because he seems to have fallen into some nasty habits. Similarly, the Rex and Tanith story, you do feel like there's more there. After all, he does admit that he loves her at one point, and we're told that they met before in Biarritz. And there may have been some lovey-dovey stuff in their background. It's really only hinted at here. I think there's some short shrift there as well.
We do dive right into the story.
We do.
You know, we don't wait at all. And the first sort of 45 minutes is a pretty fast push through a handful of inciting events. You know, all of the real sort of action of the film kind of takes place in the first half. As Rex arrives in his own airplane, so Rex van Ryn and the Duc de Richleau, they immediately head to Simon's house, where a full-on 13-person satanic coven is about to engage in some kind of performance of ritual.
You would be referring to the slaughter of the black cockerel and the white hen, sir.
Yes, indeed. That's what I'm referring to.
The meeting of the left-hand path, as it's called. The whole idea of Satanism, I can see how this would have been controversial, not only at the time the story is set, which I believe is the 20s.
20s or 30s.
20s or 30s, yeah. But also in the late 60s, you know, England was changing. The whole world was changing. But there were still aspects of England and English film that were slightly puritanical. And I think that one can see how this would have garnered the British equivalent of the X rating. But at the same time, it does feel, I guess, a little quaint now, because it's sort of, we've seen so much since then about the devil and devil worship. And of course, this film is overshadowed by perhaps the biggest devil worshiping film of the 60s, Rosemary's Baby.
Well, but I mean, in terms of quaintness, right? I mean, if you look up footage of Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan in San Francisco, which was sort of roughly around the same time, that would look quaint to you too, because of the objectivity lent by distance in time. But I think that the traditions of occult practices that were long-standing in the United Kingdom, and Satanism specifically, which was igniting in locations around the world at this time, you know, it was a pretty hot button issue, and it was something that a lot of people were up in arms about. And so I think that from the time this film was sort of conceived to when it was made, you know, the issue was so scandalous that it took them like 4 years to get the film done.
Goat of Mentis. The devil himself.
There's two fantastic set pieces in this film that
involve
devil worship. And of course, one of them is is about, I would say about, maybe a third of the way into the film, and it takes place outdoors. This is where the infamous goat sacrifice takes place, where the Kensington gore comes in.
Makes its nearly sole appearance in this film.
And we learn that the way to get rid of the devil apparently is to run into it with a car and throw a cross at it as hard as you possibly can, and it'll go up.
A pitcher of water, or a handful of salt, or maybe some burning hair.
Some mercury. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. I mean, and that's such a great scene because the robes are just so colorful, and it's a great set piece. The other set piece that I was going to mention, of course, is the other mass, which takes place at the end of the film in the basement of one of those stately homes. I also think that's particularly well choreographed. There's the Countess, the old lady who just keeps popping up in all of these scenes. She is I
love her.
She's a treasure, isn't she?
A cross-eyed, cigar-smoking lesbian countess.
Oh my God, she is just something else. I can't get
enough.
She is something else.
How can she drive her own car?
That's what I was wondering.
Cross-eyed.
I was thinking the same thing, sir.
Yes.
How is she driving her own car? And then she shows up, and I mean, both scenes, the devil worshiping scenes, are just pure bacchanalia, and like, what's she doing there,
or as close to bacchanalia as you can get for 1967 in the UK, right?
Well, and which is maybe one of the reasons it's so sort of multiracial. It's like a swinging 60s London party, and it takes place in the 20s. You have different backgrounds and ethnicities, and that kind of feels a little bit like a product of the 60s to me, as opposed to the 20s. But what do I know? I'm not a Satanist. I didn't affiliate with Satanists. In fact, in 1968, I was born. So I didn't really have a chance to get to know any Satanists back then.
Well, that's your loss, Eric.
The bride of chaos.
The bride of chaos.
The rider upon the beast.
The rider upon the beast.
With this knife do I draw out the blood which is thy life.
Only they who love without desire shall have power granted them in the darkest hour.
The interesting thing about that scene is that when the final incantation is spoken by Tanith speaking through Marie, and the lightning bolt comes in and strikes the altar, and everything goes up in flames, the coven disappears. Did you notice
that? I noticed that.
Because, what's his name? If you like Pina Colada
Mocata,
he dies, but
Mr. McCarter is no longer
in the building. You just have your main characters. Everyone else is gone.
Yes.
What happened to them?
Well, divine judgment comes through.
Sends
them all off to eternal damnation.
Well, we only hear that one of them, and who is taken in the end? Mocata.
Right. But they all disappear with Mocata. I mean, it's an interesting question because obviously time resets.
Yes, it does. Yep.
So none of the events of the film up to this point have any lasting significance.
Right.
So Tanith at the end is back in business, arm in arm with Rex van Ryn, as sort of Christopher Lee wakes up inside the magic circle.
He does explain that when that incantation is uttered, it does have an effect on the space-time continuum. It's not like it comes completely out of the blue, and I appreciated that. It's not like a sort of Deus Ex Machina ending at all. It's actually explained.
Yeah.
And that's, maybe a credit to Matheson.
So it's a Deus Ex Planica.
It's a Deus Ex Matheson.
Uh-huh. Other than the special effects, is there anything that like you would improve, you would change, that you didn't enjoy?
I would remake this film.
I think that would be a great idea.
I would love to see this film remade.
Me too.
Because I actually think that there is something like what today's effects could achieve with a plot like this. and a character like this. Like, I'd love to see somebody take on the Duke. It would be a great role for
Matt Damon.
I don't know about a Matt Damon. He'd have to be a little bit more sophisticated than Matt Damon. But, you know, like a Paul Bettany could like kill in this role. I could see someone like a Clive Owen actually doing very well in it.
So Hugh Grant.
No, I don't see that. Not at all.
Hugh Grant, Jeremy Irons type.
Ben Whishaw, you know, I could see playing like maybe like Simon. And Rex, he would be fun to cast, and Tanith would be fun to cast. I would insist almost upon an entirely English cast. If there were any Americans cast in this film, I think it would be a real disservice because this feels like such a quintessentially English story. I think this is the type of film, unlike some other films that we know are potentially going to be remade. This is a property that seems ripe for re-exploring to me.
I agree.
Let's make that happen.
I'm right on top of that, Rose.
And the winner is, well, the time has come.
Let's move on to the award segment of our show.
Please.
In which we give out prizes for the scenes and characters that we think made this such a memorable film. Let's begin at the beginning with the most disturbing scene, the so-called Tom Six Award.
Yes, named for the auteur.
Behind the Behinds in the Human Centipede series. So, Eric, why don't you take it away? What's your most disturbing scene?
I'm going to give it to a scene that I did not expect, and it comes a little bit out of the blue. There is a moment in this film in which the main characters are settling down at Richard and Marie and little Peggy's house in the country, and it is determined that Tanith must be taken out of the house, or she wants to get away. So I think she escapes at one point. And it's because she realizes that she is Mocata's medium, and that she poses a danger to the people in the house. So we see her and Rex sort of running away. We don't know exactly where they're going, but the next moment we see them, she's lying on a bed of straw. Her hands and her legs are bound, and she's screaming. And Rex is looking on with this sort of bemused look on his face, and it's a little rapey. And it just strikes me as it was like a really odd choice to just cut to this moment, because you don't see her being bound. You don't know how she became bound. And then you sort of realize that Rex did it to what? To protect her? That was disturbing to me, because I was just like, he almost looked like he was taking like too much pleasure in that particular moment.
I mean, I might have to suggest that the entire relationship between Rex and Tanith feels a little bit strange and rapey.
But at the same time, it's like it's so out of nowhere.
Not only is it out of nowhere, but it's also, I mean, when you talk about if there are creaky attributes to this film, I mean, I have less of a problem with some of the special effects than I do with some of the sexual politics of this film. It's set in 1929, you know, I mean, it may very well be accurate for the time in which the story is set, but the relationship just feels, I mean, it feels like there's a staggering age difference between the two of them, and everything feels like Rex is just trying to get in, you know, Tanith's ritual undergarments.
You asked me at the beginning why I thought this film felt dated, and this is one of the reasons for that. It's also one of the reasons why I think they could really kind of fix it in a remake. So how about you?
I find the scene in which Mocata pays a visit to Marie and Richard's house.
Oh yes.
To be generally the most disturbing scene.
Those bright, icy blue eyes.
Insanely blue eyes on Mocata, you know, but as he begins to show his dominance over literally everyone with whom he comes in contact. He starts to manipulate the mind of Marie. He's psychically manipulating Tanith and Simon, who are in other locations in the house, to try to get them to kill other principal cast members, so I just think obviously there's a lot of spectacle in this film, right? But a lot of the story is kind of grounded in reality, and really all of the characters, save one, Richard, really believe in what's happening in this story. Right. And so I think
I think that they come to believe. I think that Rex is initially a skeptic. Richard is initially a skeptic. And I think ultimately they come around after they see things like, a giant tarantula and the angel of death. That's a bit of a convincing sign, when you start seeing that shit.
When you see the devil on horseback.
Correct.
Right. But I mean, just to
the titular devil on horseback, I should say.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I just think to see the ease with which Mocata insinuates himself into their home and begins to manipulate the people in the home, that's kind of the most disturbing scene for me.
All right. Well, this brings us to our second award, the Seth Brundle Award, named for Jeff Goldblum's character in The Fly, for most likable character. Why don't you start?
I love Christopher Lee as the Duc de Richleau. I would give him the most likable character award. I think he's knowledgeable. He's adventurous. He's like a genteel upper class Indiana Jones.
100%. The Duc de Richleau. To me, he is the James Bond of anti-Satanists. He's suave. He knows exactly what to do. He's British. He's always in control. He saves the day. I described him earlier as a superhero in the sense that, he's drawn almost as broadly as a superhero and with very little backstory. He could be Bond. He could be Indiana Jones. He could be all of those things. But boy, is he a charismatic figure and
he
fun.
Sure is.
He's fun. And he actually makes me want to seek out that series and read more about him.
And quite frankly, anyone who says, when asked, may I borrow a car, when he responds, take any that you want, right? That's a pretty cool thing to hear.
Yeah. Let's move on to the next award, the so-called
the Ellen Ripley Award.
That's the one.
The one for the character who most deserved to live
and doesn't. Let's this is a tough one. I gotta say, I had a tough time with this. Gotta say, we don't really know the members of the coven very well, and there could be some good people in there for all we know who are just being manipulated. So, although I'm tempted to take a pass on this one, I'm willing to wager that there's a few good souls in that coven that just went down the wrong path, and because technically they disappear at the end of the film, the left-hand path, I'm going to say they're dead. And so the character that most deserves to live in this film is a character we don't know, but they're a part of that coven.
I mean, are you going to be so broad about it? Can't we just say that the cross-eyed lesbian cigar-smoking countess should have been, she seems like she'd be fun at a party.
She's no Ellen Ripley.
Well, that's true. But who is? But who is? This is not the easiest award to give to The Devil Rides Out.
That's correct. And that's going to happen from time to time.
However, there are definitely characters who deserve to die in this movie.
Oh,
Eric.
yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the so-called John Doe Award.
Would that be named for Kevin Spacey's character in the movie Seven?
What's in the box, sir?
You know what's in the box, Eric. It's Gwyneth Paltrow's head.
The character that most deserved to die and does.
Mocata's going home tonight with 2 awards for the character who most deserved to die. Unfortunately, he died in 1971 at the age of 2000. So I'll accept both of his awards on his behalf this evening.
Oh God. And he bites it in 2 Bond films, actually. You Only Live Twice and Diamonds Are Forever. I don't know that Charles Gray ever played a good guy. I'm sure he did. I think I read that he was in like Upstairs, Downstairs or some, PBS shows. But it's, for goodness sake, he was the narrator in Rocky Horror Picture Show.
It's astounding.
It's just a jump to the left, sir.
It's just a jump to the left-hand path.
Which takes us to our final award of the night. And boy, do I have a good one for you. This is the most gratuitous screen moment. Otherwise,
the Gaspar Noé Award, right? Or the Ken Russell Award.
And someday we'll decide which. But for now, we'll call it the
Noé Ken Award.
The Noé
Ken.
Noé Ken. You go first, sir.
I don't know that there is necessarily. I don't find anything in this movie particularly gratuitous. The goat sacrifice is pretty narratively necessary.
Yes, it is.
It's the only like bloody, really violent moment of the film.
Yep.
I wouldn't say that I have. I think I have to recuse myself from gratuitousness this evening. But tell me, what's your most gratuitous moment?
It's a moment in which the film is truly showing its age, and we talk about there being some issues with the sexual politics. The devil takes many forms in this film. He takes the form of a goat man. He takes the form of the angel of death. He takes the form of a giant spider. But there is one point at the beginning of the film. You know where I'm going. They're in Simon's observatory.
Don't look at the eyes, Rex.
They have observed the cockerel and the hen, and something happens in the middle of the room where there's a sudden flash of light and a character appears. I think it's supposed to be the devil, and he's in the form of a shirtless black man. Why it takes this form is not explained, but it is totally out of left field and just a little bit racist.
Why?
Well, and I did a screen capture of this, and it has an absolute bizarre look on his face, and it just seems like they picked a black guy because it was exotic and weird, and that's just obviously not a great look for this film. It's not a great moment, and I think it's completely gratuitous. It's one of those things where, again, we talk about things you could fix if you remade this film. I would not do that again.
How would you fix it?
I would have Gwyneth Paltrow in that moment. I don't know. I mean, it's the film showing its age and not when it was set. But
we've come from a party scene happening downstairs where there are black characters, there are Indian characters, there are
so why does that character show up?
I don't know. I mean, maybe it's a portrayal of otherness. Maybe it's a portrayal of exoticism.
Like the scene with Tanith tied up and Rex looking on. It just felt icky to me and wrong somehow, out of place.
We hope that you enjoyed this episode of 21 Jump Scare. And if you do, give us a rating on iTunes, tell your friends, subscribe, and be sure to check out additional information on our website, 21jumpscare.com. Our 21 Jump Scare theme is by Sir Cubworth. And how can our audience find you online, Mr. Winnick?
You can find me on Twitter, and you can find me on Letterboxd under my real name, Eric Alva Edison Winnick.
Well, thanks for joining us, folks. We'll see you next time at the internet's latest address for horror, 21 Jump Scare.